The leap of faith. Michael Davis was not a man prone to impulsive decisions. At 65, he had lived a life of quiet consistency. Decades as a high school math teacher in Florida, a loving marriage that spanned over 30 years, and a peaceful retirement filled with gardening, reading, and volunteering at the local library. He was comfortable in his routines, predictable in his habits, and content in solitude. But comfort doesn't always mean happiness. 3 years after losing his wife, Sarah, a woman who once filled their home with laughter and warmth, Michael found himself staring out the sliding glass door of his modest 2-bedroom condo more often than he liked. The sun still shone bright over the palm trees. The ocean breeze still whispered through the windows. But the house felt too quiet, too empty. So one crisp morning in early spring, after watching his daughter wave goodbye from her doorstep in New York again, Michael made a decision. He would try again. Not for love, at least not the kind that burns bright and fast, but for companionship. For someone to share coffee with on Sunday mornings. Someone to talk to about books, movies, or the way the sky looked just before sunset. Someone who understood what it meant to grow old gracefully, and who wouldn't mind growing older together. It wasn't much to ask. And so, with a deep breath and a heart full of cautious hope, Michael agreed to a blind date. First impressions. The cafe was small, tucked between a yoga studio and a bookstore. It smelled like fresh ground coffee beans and cinnamon rolls. Soft jazz played in the background, and the sunlight filtered through the windows in golden streaks. Michael arrived early, 15 minutes ahead of schedule, to be exact. He chose a table by the window, ordered a cappuccino, and sat down. His hands were slightly shaky. Not nervous exactly, but aware. It had been years since he'd done this. Years since he'd dressed up for someone else. He wore a clean white shirt and a blazer he hadn't touched since his last job interview. He even took extra time shaving that morning, making sure there wasn't a single stubble left. Christine walked in right on time. She was elegant, tall, poised, wearing a soft blue blouse and pearl earrings. Her hair was styled neatly, and her smile was warm, inviting. She spotted him immediately and walked over with confidence. They exchanged greetings. They shook hands. Then they sat. At first, everything felt normal. Natural. She talked about her years as a nurse, her son who had moved to Chicago, and how she loved cooking. He told her about teaching algebra, raising Sarah alone after his wife died, and how he found peace in tending to his garden. They laughed. They nodded. They sipped their drinks. For a moment, it almost felt like something could grow from this. The shift. Then came the shift. It was subtle at first. A pause in the conversation. A slight change in Christine's posture. A glint in her eye that said, "Now we get to the real stuff." She leaned forward, smiled warmly, and said, "Michael, I really appreciate your honesty today. That means a lot to me. I think we're off to a great start." He smiled back. "I agree. This has been nice." She cleared her throat gently. "There's just one thing I want to talk to you about before we go any further." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Okay. I believe in being upfront," she continued. "Especially at our age. We don't have time for games or misunderstandings. So let me tell you what I'm looking for." He nodded, intrigued. "I have 4 conditions," she said. "If we can agree on them, then maybe we can build something real." Michael blinked. For conditions? He didn't know whether to laugh or ask if she was joking, but her expression remained serious. Condition number 1, the deposit. "The first condition," Christine began, "is that we spend 6 months living together before making any long-term commitments." Michael considered this. It wasn't unheard of. Many people did trial periods these days. It was practical. But then she added, "To show sincerity, I'd like you to deposit $20,000 into a shared account. If things don't work out, I'll return part of it based on how long we live together." Michael froze. "Excuse me?" he asked, unsure he'd heard correctly. "It's just a gesture," she said quickly. "A way to prove that you're serious about this. You understand, right?" He nodded slowly, though inside, his thoughts were racing. It wasn't about the money. $20,000 wasn't nothing, but he could manage it. No, it was about the principle. Since when did relationships require deposits? Was love something you could quantify? Could trust be bought? Was affection measured in bank transfers? He thought about his late wife. About the way she used to look at him across the dinner table, eyes sparkling with understanding. There had never been contracts, no financial guarantees, just the quiet knowing that they were enough for each other. And yet here he was, being asked to put money on the table before even getting to know the woman sitting across from him. Still, he held his tongue. He wanted to hear all 4 conditions before passing judgment. Condition number 2, the dream vacation. The second condition, Christine said, leaning back slightly, is that we take a trip to Hawaii within the next month. Michael blinked again. A trip, he repeated. Yes, she said brightly. Hawaii has always been my dream destination. I imagine us walking along the beach at sunset, flying over volcanoes in a helicopter, and having a professional photo shoot to capture the beginning of our journey together. She spoke with such enthusiasm that for a moment, Michael forgot how strange this all was. Hawaii sounded lovely. The idea of seeing new places with someone special was appealing. But then she added, "You'll cover all the costs, of course. I'll handle the planning." His smile faltered. He wasn't poor. He had saved well during his career. But this was supposed to be a trial period, not a vacation paid for in advance. What kind of relationship started with one person footing the bill for an extravagant getaway? And the photo shoot? The symbolism? It felt like they were already skipping ahead to the final chapter without ever writing the first few pages. Still, he stayed polite. Still, he listened. Condition number 3, financial control. By the time Christine reached her third condition, Michael's stomach had tightened into a knot. If we decide to move in together permanently, or even marry, I will need control over the finances, she explained. I'll manage your retirement income and give you a monthly allowance for personal expenses. She paused, then added, if you overspend, you'll have to make it up by doing chores around the house. Michael stared at her. He had spent his entire life working hard, paying taxes, saving every penny, watching the stock market, planning for his future. And now, a woman he barely knew expected him to hand over his money to her. You're saying, he began carefully, that I won't have access to my own funds. That's right, she said. It's just better organized that way. He couldn't help but laugh, softly, under his breath. No offense, he said, but that sounds more like a business partnership than a relationship. She shrugged. Maybe that's what relationships are at this stage in life. Michael disagreed. Strongly. Marriage was about partnership, yes, but also independence. Shared goals, mutual respect, and freedom to choose. Not financial domination. Condition number 4, separate bedrooms. Michael braced himself for the final condition. He was right to do so. My last condition, Christine said, is that we maintain separate bedrooms, even if we live together or get married. She explained that she had gotten used to sleeping alone after her divorce. That sharing a bed disrupted her sleep cycle. That personal space was essential to her mental health. Again, Michael tried to see her point. Many couples kept separate rooms. Some preferred it. It wasn't unusual. But in context, after hearing 3 increasingly transactional conditions, this felt less like a boundary and more like a wall. He thought of his late wife again, of how they used to curl up together on cold nights, whispering stories until they fell asleep, of how sometimes just holding hands was enough. Love, to him, was about closeness, intimacy, connection, not contractual arrangements, not separate rooms, not silent nights. The decision. Michael sat quietly for a moment. Christine watched him expectantly, waiting for his response. Finally, he placed his cup down and said, "Thank you for being honest with me." She smiled. "But I don't think I can meet your expectations." Her smile faded slightly. "I value autonomy, respect, and emotional connection," he continued. "And while I understand where you're coming from, I don't think we're compatible." She nodded politely. "I appreciate your candor," she said. He offered an excuse about needing to leave for an appointment. They parted ways with a handshake. As he walked out of the cafe, the Florida sun felt heavier than usual. Reflections on companionship. Back home, Michael sat on his porch with a cup of tea. The birds chirped. The wind rustled the leaves. But his mind was far away. He replayed the conversation in his head. Again and again. He thought about Christine's confidence, her clarity, her boldness. He admired those traits, in theory. But in practice, he realized that love, especially at their age, should be about healing, not control. About giving, not demanding. About building, not dictating. He thought about what he truly wanted in a partner. Someone who respected his past, who honored his independence, who believed in the quiet beauty of shared silence. Not someone who treated intimacy like a negotiation. Lessons learned. In the days that followed, Michael found himself reflecting more deeply on the realities of dating later in life. He wasn't naive. He knew people carried scars, pain, past disappointments, and sometimes they protected themselves in odd ways. But he also believed that real connection required vulnerability, risk, trust, not contracts, not checklists, not financial guarantees. He realized that companionship was not something you could force or engineer. It was something that grew, slowly, patiently, naturally. Like a garden, you planted the seeds. You watered them. You waited. And if you were lucky, something beautiful bloomed. Moving forward, Michael decided not to rush into anything else. He returned to his routine, gardening, reading, volunteering. He met friends for coffee. He called his daughter more often. And he reminded himself that solitude was not loneliness. Sometimes it was peace. Sometimes it was strength. He still believed in finding someone someday, but only if and when it felt right. Until then, he would keep his heart open and his wallet closed. A letter to others. A week later, Michael recorded a video. He titled it simply, "A 65-year-old man went on a blind date with a 52-year-old woman, heard for her demands, and ran away." It went viral. Thousands of viewers wrote to thank him, men and women alike. Some shared similar experiences. Others confessed they were afraid to date again after being hurt. But many just wanted to say, "Thank you for speaking up." Because in a world where love often feels like a game, Michael reminded everyone that some things are still sacred. Respect, dignity, integrity, and the courage to walk away when something doesn't feel right. Conclusion: finding peace in the unknown. Michael didn't find love that day, but he found something else. Clarity, strength, and a renewed belief in the kind of relationship worth waiting for. One built not on conditions, but on connection, on kindness, on shared silences, and the quiet joy of knowing someone sees you, truly sees you, and loves you anyway. The weight of expectations. Michael sat on his porch for hours that evening, watching the sky shift from orange to deep blue. The air was still, yet inside him, everything felt unsettled. He sipped his tea slowly, letting the warmth soothe the tension in his chest. It had been a long time since he'd felt so deeply conflicted, not about someone else, but about himself, about what he wanted, about what love meant at this stage of life, and most importantly, about whether it was even possible to find companionship without compromise. The conversation with Christine replayed in his mind like a film reel stuck on repeat. Her confidence, her clarity, her list, meticulously thought out, well-practiced, almost rehearsed. She had known exactly what she wanted. There was no ambiguity, no hesitation. And that, perhaps, was what unsettled him the most. Because for all her certainty, he found himself questioning his own path forward. Was he too old to be looking for something new? Too set in his ways? Too afraid of being hurt again? Or maybe, just maybe, he was holding on to an ideal that no longer existed. A generation divided by love. Later that night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Michael couldn't help but think about how different dating was now compared to when he met Sarah, his late wife. Back then, love was simpler, or at least, it felt that way in hindsight. You met someone. You got to know them. You spent time together. You made mistakes. You learned from each other. You built something real, piece by piece. There were no conditions, no contracts, no checklists. Just two people, figuring things out as they went along. But now, love seemed more like a negotiation, a transaction, a risk to be managed rather than a gift to be shared. He thought about Christine again, not with anger, but with curiosity. He wasn't angry at her. In fact, he respected her honesty. She hadn't played games. She had laid everything on the table, plain and simple. But was that really what relationships had become? Boundaries dressed up as demands. Security disguised as control. Love hidden behind financial guarantees. It was hard not to feel like the world had changed in ways he didn't quite understand anymore. The ghosts of relationships passed. Michael turned on his side, facing the window where moonlight spilled across the floor like silver dust. He thought about Sarah, about the early days of their marriage, how they used to bicker over small things, like who forgot to take out the trash or why the thermostat was always too cold. How they used to laugh until their sides hurt over nothing at all. How they could sit in silence for hours and still feel completely connected. She never asked for anything beyond his presence, his attention, his heart, and he gave it freely. Even now, years after her passing, he still carried pieces of her with him. The scent of lavender in his closet, the soft jazz records she loved, the handwritten notes tucked into old books. Those were the things that reminded him of love. Not contracts, not bank statements, not photo shoots in Hawaii. He wondered if Christine had ever known that kind of love, or if hers had always been measured in expectations and safeguards. Maybe she had been hurt before. Maybe she had lost someone too. Maybe she had tried trusting someone and ended up paying the price. If that was true, he couldn't blame her for protecting herself. But he also couldn't pretend that her version of love aligned with his. The price of security. The next morning, Michael brewed coffee and sat at his kitchen table, watching birds flit between the palm trees outside. He picked up his phone and scrolled through the news headlines. Stories about rising inflation, political tensions, climate disasters, and relationship advice columns filled with tips on how to protect yourself financially before tying the knot. It struck him how much the world had changed. People weren't just cautious about falling in love, they were scared of it. Scared of getting hurt. Scared of losing money. Scared of giving too much. And somewhere along the way, that fear had seeped into the very foundation of relationships. He thought about Christine again. Her 4 conditions, each one carefully designed to shield her from potential pain. But in doing so, had she locked herself out of something beautiful? Something unexpected? Something worth taking a chance on? He realized that while he understood her motivations, he couldn't live by those rules. He didn't want a relationship built on conditions. He wanted one built on trust, on shared moments, on laughter over breakfast, on quiet evenings holding hands. He wanted someone who would walk beside him, not ahead of him, not behind him, but beside him. Someone who saw him not as a checklist to be completed, but as a person to be known. Fully, completely, without reservations. The loneliness that isn't empty. That afternoon, Michael walked down to the beach. The sand was warm beneath his feet, the waves lapping gently against the shore. He watched a couple walking hand in hand in the distance, silhouetted against the sun. They looked happy, carefree, connected. He felt a pang in his chest, not jealousy, but longing. Not for them, but for the possibility of something like that. Something real, something unscripted, something that didn't come with a contract. He sat on a bench overlooking the ocean and let the wind wrap around him like an old friend. He thought about how lonely he had felt in the months after Sarah died, how empty the house had become, how heavy the silence had grown, and how, in trying to fill that void, he had nearly fallen into something that would have only made it worse. Because loneliness, he realized, wasn't always about being alone. Sometimes, it was about being with the wrong person, about pretending to be okay when you weren't, about settling for less because you were afraid of being alone. And that, he knew, was a far lonelier place to be. The courage to walk away. By the time he returned home, the sun had dipped below the horizon. He lit a candle, put on some music, and sat down at his desk. He opened his laptop and stared at the blank screen. Then, slowly, he began to type. Hello everyone. My name is Michael Davis. I'm 65 years old. I live in Florida. I used to teach math. My wife passed away 3 years ago. I have a daughter in New York. And last week, I went on a blind date. He paused. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then he continued. I went into that meeting with hope, with an open heart, with the belief that companionship could still exist, that love, even in its quieter forms, could find a way back into my life. But what I found wasn't love. It was a proposal, a business plan, a list of demands wrapped in the illusion of romance. I don't say this to shame anyone. I say it because I think many of us are searching for connection in a world that's forgotten how to give it freely. We've become so good at protecting ourselves that we've forgotten how to open our hearts. We've become so focused on what we want that we've stopped listening to what others need. So today, I want to share my story, not because I have all the answers, but because I believe in asking the right questions. He hit save. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he clicked publish. The response. Within hours, messages started pouring in. Some from men his age, thanking him for speaking up. Some from women who said they'd faced similar situations and felt seen for the first time. One message stood out. A woman named Linda wrote, "Thank you for sharing this. I've been there. I dated someone who wanted me to sign a prenup before our third date. I stayed for a while, thinking maybe it was just modern love. But eventually, I realized that love shouldn't feel like a legal document. Another man wrote, "You described exactly how I felt after a recent date. I kept thinking maybe I was being unreasonable. Maybe I was the problem. But reading your words reminded me that I'm not alone." Michael read every message. He responded to as many as he could. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't just speaking into the void. He was connecting, sharing, being heard, finding peace in the unknown. Over the following weeks, Michael found himself reflecting more deeply on what he truly wanted. He didn't delete his dating profile, but he did make a promise to himself. No more rushing. No more second-guessing his instincts. No more forcing connections that didn't feel right. He would wait, patiently, with an open heart, but not an open wallet. He would keep living his life, gardening, reading, volunteering. And if love came knocking, he would answer, but not before making sure it sounded like love and not a demand.